It used to welcome thousands of rail passengers arriving, departing, or passing through Sparta, Illinois each year. But the old depot for the Gulf, Mobile, and Ohio Railroad is now a museum, named for one of Sparta's most distinguished native sons. Roscoe Misselhorn was an artist who spent most of his life working with a sketch pad and pencil.
He loved the trains in the depot, and this is a collection of 33 steam trains that he did over the years.
Arlene Green, an accomplished portrait artist, was a friend and former student of Misselhorn. Were these trains from across the country? Did they pass through town?
No, they didn't pass through town. No, they did not. Just the diesels passed through town. They were from all across the country. He traveled extensively in every state, on the mainland plus Canada, and sketched in every state. He would search out landmarks and points of interest. And he loved an old dilapidated shed as much as a beautiful monument of some kind.
Covered bridges were pretty popular with Misselhorn. Perhaps that's because a relative designed and built some of them.
He would search out every covered bridge in existence. And there aren't many left in the country, I understand. And these are woodcuts where he would carve out the image from one of his drawings and then ink it all in, and then it could be printed. This is a collection of his political cartoons, which shows how versatile he really was.
In comparison to today's political cartoons, which are really biting.
Oh yes, these were not. These were humorous, but not as biting as today's are.
Misselhorn was prolific, to say the least. The museum has some 2,000 sketches by the artist, but it's estimated he created as many as 5,000 works over the course of his career. Roscoe Misselhorn was born in 1902, the second of 6 children of August Misselhorn. The family patriarch sold farm equipment for a living and owned farms in the Sparta area that he leased out. August's wife Clara and all their children drew and painted, but only Roscoe became a full-time artist.
In the 3rd grade, he drew a picture of a chicken, and his teacher liked it so much, she put it up on the blackboard. And he was so proud of the recognition he received that he says he decided then and there to become an artist.
A high school dropout, Misselhorn's talents got him admitted to the St. Louis School for the Arts, now known as Washington University.
When he really first started out, he had to supplement his art income by painting signs. He worked in a clothing store for some time. But when he started publishing his work and having it appear in books and magazines and on calendars, then he started to achieve some monetary success.
Throughout his career, Misselhorn's biggest supporter was his wife of 70 years, the former Ruth Ezell.
She was the backbone of his business, really. She handled the business end of it. She accompanied him on all his appearances and trips. They traveled extensively together. I did want you to notice this photograph of Roscoe because it was so typical of how he would sketch. Right on site, right on location. And this was in later years when he used his car for comfort, but usually he would set up a little camp stool and perch right there on it with his clipboard on his knees, his box of pencils, and sketch away. And most of his pieces were done in one day.
Well, I got plenty of evidence there. Here, you want to try one?
He and I and his wife, Ruth, and a friend of mine went on a sketching trip together. in what he called Old Mill Country in Missouri.
Did Arlene do good?
I think so. I think it's excellent.
And then when we came back, we interviewed him in his studio.
Stuff over here. And then these are my mother. This is a pastel I did about 40 years ago, and a little pencil drawing. Does it show up enough on there?
I did this portrait of Roscoe in 1991 and donated it to the gallery. And I had him sit in his studio in his home just like he would if he were sketching. This is how it turned out. I call it the pencil artist. He was my teacher for 10 years. He was my mentor as well as a good friend.
In 1989, 3 years after the railroad closed the depot, a foundation was created to preserve Roscoe Misselhorn's work. A few years later, the building was purchased by the city and transformed into a museum.
He was just delighted that we turned it into a gallery in his honor and to showcase his work.
Misselhorn died in 1997 at the age of 95. During his lifetime, he came to be known as the Norman Rockwell of Illinois.
He loved realism, as Norman Rockwell did.
Now, I would be remiss in doing a story about the Misselhorn Museum without mentioning the building's other claim to fame. This old depot, and in fact the entire town of Sparta, served as the setting for a groundbreaking movie filmed here nearly 40 years ago. In this 1967 Academy Award-winning film, Sparta, Illinois became Sparta, Mississippi. Rod Steiger portrayed a bigoted police chief trying to solve a murder. He eventually joins forces with a black Philadelphia homicide detective played by Sidney Poitier.
Virgil, that's a funny name for a nigger boy that comes from Philadelphia. What do they call you up there?
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
It was a film that was made during the 60s when there was a lot of racial unrest, and they didn't feel that the film could be made in the South. And they selected Sparta because they thought it looked like the South. The architecture of the homes, the layout of the town looked Southern. So they simply called it Sparta, Mississippi. The crew,
and as you might expect, in the heat of the night has earned a permanent place in the Misselhorn Museum.
We were all fascinated with it. I followed the crew around myself with a little Instamatic camera and took pictures, which a few of them are on this wall here.
But it was a man's love of trains and his own artistic gifts that inspired this Sparta institution. Roscoe Misselhorn left behind a wealth of drawings, many of which depict structures and scenes that no longer exist.
He was an artist historian, exactly. That's how we refer to him, because he had the facts and the history behind everything he drew. Unfortunately, this was not recorded. His memory for all these things were not recorded, so they're lost. But we still have his drawings, and they tell a lot.